Greetings, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Goer Live. We have a special guest joining us today. Some of you may know of the name Chris Carlson. Chris Carlson started the Sportech company way back in the mid-90s with a single product, a headlight cover for snowmobiles, for Polaris snowmobiles in particular. He grew that into a company with over $100 million worth of sales. He started Carlson Motorsports, a big snowcross team. He started the ERX Motorsports Park, which many of you probably know here in the Twin Cities. So he's done a lot of things, but more than anything, he has an unrivaled passion for snowmobiling. And so we want to talk about that and about the future of our sport. So through the magic of computers here, I'm going to bring him in, and you should now see him on my left. Greetings, Mr. Carlson. How are you this fine day?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well. We're shooting this during the big coronavirus situation, which has us all sheltering in place. So it's just good seeing another human being. But hopefully by the time a lot of people are watching this, we'll all be turned loose again on society.
Yes, I hope so. Sooner the better.
So I kind of gave your business resume earlier. Why don't you give us your snowmobiling resume? I know the snowmobiling has been a part of your life for an awful long time.
Yeah. Well, and our business, Sportech, really started with snowmobile products. And that was, the basis for our very first products. And for the first several years, we were purely a snowmobile aftermarket manufacturer. I come from a family of snowmobilers. I'm fortunate enough to have a father that introduced me to the sport at a very young age. And I've, been around snowmobiling and snowmobile racing all my life. So, it's deeply ingrained in who I am and remains there today. And, even though at the end, Sportech didn't hardly make parts for snowmobiles anymore, we did a little, but primarily side-by-side utility vehicles and motorcycles and marine and agriculture. But my love of snowmobiling has not diminished at all. So I just consider myself a huge fan of the sport.
So talk about some of those early machines and early memories that you made. From talking to you previously, I've heard stories about Mercuries and Polarises and a bunch of different models. What sort of stuff were you riding when you were first getting involved?
Yeah, so my first, my memories of the very first snowmobile experiences were on late 60s and early 70s vintage sleds. So my dad had a 440 Rupp Magnum, and the very first snowmobile that I got to call mine was a Rupp Sprint 440, and we had after that we had some Articats early 70s, like a 74 LT Gray, which was a real hot rod back in the day. And
absolutely.
So that's kind of the early stages, and then when I was a teenager, through the kind of the late 70s. That was the era of the TXL, 77, 78, the cross-country cats and the TXLs, and then leading into the course of the century in 79. So those are kind of the two eras that I'm most fond of, early 70s and then kind of the late 70s.
So as you said, your original business started out with products for snowmobile. It kind of grew out of your passion, and the business grew beyond snowmobiling. But to this day, I don't know a guy who likes to talk snowmobiling more than you do. With our audience, you're probably preaching to the choir, but to you, what makes snowmobiling special? What is it about the sport that has made it so central to who you are as far as just being a rider?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think those of us that ride a lot and have ridden our whole lives know the answer. It's how else can, and I think we've all tried to replicate it. I love ATVs and UTVs. Yeah. They're great fun. Not like snowmobiling. Yeah. I think for me, it's the combination of being able to get to remote areas, beautiful areas in the winter that you normally would never get to. So it's a combination of that, covering a lot of ground, right? You can really cover ground on a snowmobile in the day and say, we put on 200 miles or 150 miles, and you can really see some country, and then blend in the performance component at any level that you're comfortable with. But I mean, the performance of these sleds for a long time is just absolutely amazing, the power to weight ratio. So if you're a motorhead, it's hard not to just be addicted to it. So you combine all those elements, that's what makes snowmobiling special. I mean, the camaraderie, obviously can be replicated in other sports. I don't think in the same way, but you know, if you like to go fast and you love, you know, high-tech equipment, you want to spend a great day outside with family, I don't think there's anything else that I've ever found that can match it.
I agree with you 100%. You know, you and I first met each other, you know, more than 20 years ago in what I guess we can now look back on is the roaring 90s. And in the 90s, you'd go to the, you know, a trailhead in Two Harbors or the Brainerd Lakes area or whatever, and you had to get there early just to get a parking spot for your truck and trailer, which at the time, you know, most of us were pulling two-placed open trailers.
Right.
Now, sadly, it's not that hard to get a parking spot in a lot of popular riding areas anymore. It's the sport has contracted a little bit. There's probably a lot of reasons for that, whether they're demographic reasons, cost reasons. But it's still, for those of us who enjoy it, as you said, there's still nothing like it in terms of the exhilaration and the bonding you can do. It's
Right.
To me, it's you know, so far above everything else in terms of being my favorite hobby, and I know you share that.
Yeah. And you know what's really sad about that is it has contracted. There are fewer people riding. The snowmobiles are better than they've ever been, by leaps and bounds. And there are more trails and better trails than we've ever had. So you have fewer riders on better trails with better equipment. The experience is, and especially the last couple of years with the snow conditions we've had, you know, I know you know this. I know there's people that ride are like, oh my God. I mean, it's been amazing. I mean, and you don't ever run into those, you know, the Saturday night, Sunday morning trails all beat up. I can't remember the last time I really was on a nasty trail like we used to run into up in Michigan in the 90s, right? Or even on the North Shore on a big weekend, you know, back in the day where you just would pay the price. You know? And I can't even remember the last time I've seen one of those trails. So it's really sad that people don't get a chance to experience this, because I mean, I think the equipment's better, the trails are better. This should be, you know, the greatest of all times for the sport. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't experiencing it.
As far as the machines being better, me and my coworker Mark have talked many times recently about, you know, if you have a modern snowmobile, when's the last time you changed a spark plug? I mean, that used to be something you'd have to do all the time, or, you know, even drive belts last a long time, and, you know, they don't bust while you're riding, and just all the things that, frankly, we used to put up with carbureted sleds that weren't as reliable. I mean, now you just ride and you just enjoy all that's out there, and you can cover so much more ground, and it's just so enjoyable.
Well, funny little story, quick one. My son Andrew has a bunch of buddies, and they are all buying what they call vintage sleds, which is somewhat insulting to you and I, old guys. I mean, mid-90s snowmobile is really not a vintage snowmobile, but they're buying them because they're old school. And you get this, they love how they handle. They love how they turn, and so buying these old Red Rocket 440 Indies, and they're buying the ZRs, and they're, you know, the old MXZs, and then they go riding. And Andrew bought one here a few weeks ago, and they were going to do one last ride, and he brought it home, and it looked nice and everything, and couldn't get it to run quite right. So they were stumped. They didn't, you know, he's like, do we even have jets anymore? I mean, what, you know, we haven't jets in Snowmobile in a while. So we had to dig out my old jet box, and it was an old I dug out my old weights, and he took it out, and it was better, but it still wouldn't run. And I said, well, you know, it's 50 degrees. And it you know, it was jetted for, probably 0 or whatever. And he said, well, it should still, oh, no, that isn't how that works. So it made me feel good, because they had to get the old guy in there to work on this thing a little bit, but it really brought back memories. And to your point, we never did get this. We had a hard time getting it running, and it was a spark plug. And he said, you know, should we change those plugs? I said, when's the last time you had a fault spark plug? Well, it was a mid-90s sled, and even then they didn't do it a lot, but sometimes. So we had to put plugs. He ended up getting it running. They had a great time, but it's been. I remember as I was working on that thing, I can't remember the last time I put spark plugs in a snowmobile. I mean, they just don't anymore. And same with driving.
Yeah, it's a good thing though, because those spark plugs are really hard to reach now on these modern sleds too, with these tighter chassis. If you had to change them, it'd be pretty tough. So you and I have kids they're roughly the same age, and on varying levels, we've both gotten our kids involved in the sport. but it is somewhat hard to even get family members to stay involved in this sport because it takes a little bit of a time commitment and things like that. But once you get the people out, once I get my son out, and last winter I had my daughter out and my wife out riding, once they get out an experience, they just want to go again. And
Yes.
you and I have discussed this previously. I think that's really a key to making the sport work long term is butts in seats. We got to get friends, neighbors, family members, whatever it is. We got to get their butts on a seat and let them experience what you and I are talking about because it is so great.
Yeah. Well, so that goes for people that have never been on a snowmobile. I think obviously if we can expose them to it, we have a really good chance of getting them in the sport. But how about the guys that we know that quit riding in the 80s or the 90s? And part of it was, maybe they were busy, but part of it was they're frustrated with working on sleds and they're having problems. And they didn't ride that great back then. You put some of these old school guys that haven't been riding in 10 years on this new equipment, they're blown away. I mean,
Yes.
and I know you've seen that where you bring someone with, and I'll always ask, when's the last time you were on a snowmobile? I did it this winter. I brought an employee with and hadn't been on a snowmobile in, I think, 12 or 14 years, we figured. And we went 180 miles that day. And every time we stop, you just like, I just can't believe this.
Yeah.
I just can't believe it, the way they handle and the way they ride and they're comfortable. And, the hand warmers actually work. And, I think that's the key, both new people, introducing them to the sport we love, and then maybe trying to bring some of the folks that haven't been in the sport for a while back in just to see how great it is.
Let's break this down on two levels because there really are two levels, and there's probably two different types of audiences that are going to watch our video here. A couple of years ago, you had a podcast you did with Gary Walton and his Ride X365 when you were leaving your snowcross team, where you had talked about it being a responsibility for people in the racing community to want the snowmobile industry to do well for the better of all of us. There's other people in the industry as well, that maybe aren't actively involved in trying to, open this up to friends and make sure the sport is healthy. Why is it important? Why should they care, industry people?
Well, I mean, yeah, we talked about this. I think people need to care for a variety of reasons. To your point about the racers, if they have any aspirations of racing into the future, and they have some level of sponsorship from the OEMs and from the aftermarket manufacturers, they better hope that they continue to sell snowmobiles. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that if they don't, racing's over. If there aren't snowmobilers, you don't have snowmobile racing. Snowmobiling came first. Then I think the next day snowmobile racing started. But nonetheless, it's critically important. So from the racers' standpoint, I think that they should be obligated. I know that our drivers through the years when we were racing, my son and others that raced for us, they were obligated to come to our Learn to Ride clinic at ERX that we host every year, where we introduce racing. And it's focused primarily on racing, but it's designed to get kids and first-time riders in to see if they want to try it. And it's low intimidation. We invite all the pros to come in and participate and get them excited about it. We've done just ride days too, and I have leaned on a few people in the industry. It's like, hey, maybe it's time that you give back a day, right? The sport has treated you well. I think you and I both know people that have made a living in this sport, and a lot of them go out of their way to attract people, but some don't. And I think we're at a point here, a pretty critical juncture in the sport, where if we don't figure out how to get people engaged, if we don't figure out a way to help these OEMs sell snowmobiles, there could be a sad day coming. And I don't think it's that far off. And I don't want to be a fear monger, but I know one thing: if it ever did go away, if snowcross went away, if racing went away, or one of the manufacturers went away, there'd be a lot of people upset and disappointed. And I think we all have to do what we can now to help. So I think that's why they need to care. It's about sustainability. Let's keep this thing alive.
So at different times over the years, I've written columns. I wrote one a couple of years ago where I pretty much begged our readers. I said, just take two people out riding this winter. If each one of us takes out two people riding, and then that either left the sport years ago or this would be new to them, if we all did that, the sport would be so much healthier. And that winter, I actually kind of made it a dedication of my own. I ended up bringing, over the course of the winter, over the course of 3 months, 23 people who either hadn't ridden in at least 5 years or who had never ridden, out for a ride. And those columns are generally well accepted, but I always get at least 1 or 2 people, an active snowmobiler that basically writes in or emails today or puts something on social media that says, why should I care? Man, the last thing I want is more people out on the trails. I want the trails to myself. I don't want a bunch of people that I'm going to start meeting in corners or trucks and trailers on the road. I don't care if I grow the sport. Talk to that guy. Why should he care?
You want me to talk to that guy?
Yeah, I want you to talk to that guy. I'll give you his phone number, as a matter of fact.
You're listening to you, and I'm thinking, well, you know, how selfish. That's just that's incredibly selfish. Unfortunately, there's a cross section of humanity that thinks like that.
Yeah.
And not to get political, but we're seeing it today. People that are hoarding and people that think only about themselves. Man, that's sad. I really feel bad for anyone that thinks that way. You know, why should they care? Because the sport will be gone. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember the early days of the groomed trail system.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many miles there are in the state of Minnesota now, but compared to in the 80s, I mean, there hardly were any. And you take the money out of the sport, you quit selling snowmobiles, you quit selling registrations. We will not have grant and aid systems. There will not be trail systems. That's why they should care for, that and a number of other reasons. So yeah, that's unfortunate. I think I gotta believe that's a minority of people, and certainly a minority of snowmobilers. One thing I found is that snowmobilers are some of the coolest people I've ever met. And to your point earlier about, you pull into a great pit stop and you see a bunch of sleds there, there's a really high probability that we could get into a cool conversation. Just talking about sleds, current sleds, old sleds, how are the trails? Remember back in the day? I mean, that's a big part of our snowmobile community. It's like why I love heydays and love these different events, because you see friendly faces who love the sport as you do, and you can always, it seems like we always have something to talk about. So I hope that people understand that, and I think they do, but I think I think a few of us need to be ambassadors. I think in any initiative, in any event, there's always a few people that rise above, that lead, that will go the extra mile. I know you are committed to it. I am. My family is. I know a lot of people that want to get behind this. So I'm anxious to talk about what's next and what we can do to make it better.
So I know you've done some stuff at ERX with some manufacturers and things like that to have open ride days. I guess to tell the viewers about some of the efforts that you've been involved with, and maybe some of the things that we could partner on in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's worked in the past is we had a big snowcross race on a Saturday, and all the manufacturers were there, and we had an open ride day on Sunday where each of the brands were able to bring dealers in, and they had snowmobiles on display, ready to go. They had gear, they had helmets, they had boots, they had jackets, and we opened it up to the public. It was one of the best attended events we've ever had. It was almost postcard-like. It was snowing, very Christmassy, great time of the year, and we had families showing up. We had a track set up where they could run the 120s and 200s, and then we had all the current trail sleds, and we knocked down the snowcross track and created a really cool area for them to ride. It was amazing. And the dealers were selling snowmobiles. People were really having a great time. And I know that's an example of something that we could do without a whole lot of effort. Right. We've had learn to ride days where people can come in and bring their kids and they can experience to see what it's like. I think that's something that we could easily replicate. But I also think that we need to expand that. The last couple of years, we've had snow where we have a decent trail network right there where we could actually take people on a short trail ride rather than just going around a small, track. So I think that's something we can do. And I think what you and I talked about too is if we can get some of the manufacturers involved, if we can get more ambassadors involved that want to support this, I don't think it needs to be super expensive, but I think it's something, if we plan this and get in front of it, we can have some events that are structured or directed at introducing new people to the sport, and then bringing some of the folks that haven't done it in a while back in to see how cool it is and how just how great this equipment is.
I think another reason that it's important to try to grow the sport and introduce new people into the sport is really the grassroots network and the snowmobile clubs that put in the trails and maintain everything and get the land access. One of the most passionate people I know about this very topic is Jerry Hansen with the Minnesota United Snowmobilers Association, and same thing. More snowmobilers in one sense makes more stress on, I suppose, on the infrastructure. But without more snowmobilers, that infrastructure starts to disappear, as you were saying earlier. And so, we're fortunate in the Twin Cities to have an awesome place like ERX where we might be able to host some of these sort of events. But whether, if you're in New York State, if you're in Maine, if you're in Colorado, to wherever people are who are viewing this, to find a way to bring some people out and just put butts in seats, let them enjoy it. The other thing is, and I wrote this in the just take two people riding column. If you bring somebody with you on a good snowmobile ride and you put them on a decent sled and maybe you let them wear the nicest gear that's the most windproof or whatever, you're going to make a friend for life. That person's going to bond with you, much better than you are having a beer with them at Billy Bob's Pub and Grub up the road. So it's aside from the big picture, it's also very personal when you get to invite people to stuff like this, which is something I really enjoyed that winter where I took so many different people on.
Yeah, and I think one of the natural pushbacks that you'll get is, well, it's so expensive. And indeed it is, right? There's no denying that these new snowmobiles are expensive, crazy expensive. Yeah. But I think you and I talked about this when we chatted last was, you can buy a 10-year-old snowmobile right now, a 2010. That's a really nice snowmobile. You can buy these things for $1,500, $2,000, depending on what you're buying. You could get two of them. You could get a used trailer. You can piece together some gear, and it's pretty affordable, compared to other sports and other activities. And there's nothing wrong with those snowmobiles. They're actually really, really nice sleds, and it's a great way to jump in and get your feet wet. And then I think we know what's going to happen. Then they're going to go riding with one of us with a newer sled, and we're going to ride it, and they're going to be like, yeah, I got to go down to the dealer and talk to them. And that's a natural evolution. But I think if people want to look at the expense side of it, I think it can be done. I think we have the other thing is we really have a lot of great used sleds in the system right now.
Yes,
they're kind of a hot commodity, and there are people that are still making parts for them, and there's a lot of excitement around it. So I think that's an alternative that we have to make sure people are aware of at the very least.
You're absolutely right. 10-year-old sleds have never been this good, if you can put it that way. In 2000, if you were buying a 1990 sled, that 1990 sled was pretty used up. But in 2020, if you're buying a 2010, again, all they do is run nowadays, and the suspensions by then were already very modern, and everyone was running injected motors by then, and so it's still going to be a very nice piece of equipment. You might have to go through the clutches and stuff and do minor service, but you're going to start out with a very nice machine at not a big expense.
Yeah, so I think that, and I don't know what needs to be done there. I think that you have a unique opportunity to create some awareness around that. I would think that the dealers would want to try to participate in that. They all have used equipment, and put some packages together, maybe create some awareness on social media or at some of these shows, so that people, because I get the question, I know you have too, well, how much are these things? Well, if you say, well, that brand new model, 16,000, like, oh, that's too much. Yeah, it is too much. It's a lot of money. But what if you could you could get two sleds and a trailer for $5,000 or $6,000? And get some really nice, high reliability sleds that are going to perform well. I think a lot of people would say, hey, I'm in.
Yeah,
I'm in. And there's nothing wrong with those sleds.
Nothing at all.
There's nothing at all wrong with them. So, and to your point, if it was back in the 90s and you were buying a 10-year-old sled, I'd beware. That's because they had some issues, but not so. Yeah,
It'd be pretty handy to buy a 10-year-old sled back then. It'd be pretty
yeah,
good with wrenches.
for sure, but
Yeah.
not now. So I think that's a great option, and I think that I honestly, I don't know about you, but I saw more people riding some older sleds this past winter,
Yeah.
and cool sleds, and I think a lot of them in that era, and I hope more and more people do it because it's a great option and it's a great way to get engaged in this sport, and at a reasonable dollar number. So.
All right. Well, hey, let's wrap up because I've taken enough of your time with just a simple, what should be a simple question. Give me Chris Carlson's 3 favorite places he's ever ridden. What are the places that have burned a hole in your heart?
I'm a huge fan of the North Shore. I really love riding from, we used to ride from Two Harbors area and then run the shore and then go west, right? And I love that whole area as you go into, depending on how far you would go in a day. I mean, if you go to the Trestle
Yep,
and then
that's
you go
lunch.
towards Ely, and you make the loop down, and I'm not going to remember the name of that town. I remember I got a speeding ticket there last time, but that long break, Babbitt, going into Babbitt and looping around. Yeah. To me, that's some of the best riding. I love, I really love Cabotogama and that area. I like to center on Ash River and then go, because you can literally go in any direction. You can leave that area and go to the North Shore. You can go up and pop into Canada. There's endless options. I mean, those 2 areas there are probably 2 of my favorite. And then I'm from kind of north central Minnesota, and I've always enjoyed that riding around Mille Lacs, north and east. So from Mile, the Sioux Line, Jack Shack, McGregor, Big Sandy, over to Aiken, looping through there. I think those are some of the best trails. Our friend Les Pins is part of that club up in Isle. He does a phenomenal job grooming, and that's one of my areas. And that's a day shot, right? So for those of us that live in the Twin City area, it's an hour, and you can dump, and you can really get some quality riding. So, yeah, those are 3 of my favorites.
I didn't know we were going to do a commercial for Minnesota Department of Tourism, but that was very well done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend, for participating in this. It was a lot of fun catching up with you, and we know you're down in Florida right now, hopefully chasing some big fish. So enjoy that. And
I will.
We're looking forward to riding with you and seeing you at ERX next winter.
Sounds good, John. Thanks for your time.
Perfect. Thank you.